All right, well, thank you, everyone. My name is Cyrus, and first, I'd like to say that I'm extremely humbled to be here. When I look through the list of speakers, really like fighting slavery and starting schools in Pakistan for underprivileged children, and I made some maps. I mean, you guys really blow me away. Right, so my project is, my talk is called Reimagining or Reimaging Boston, MBTA Maps for 2014 to 2024. So the sort of story of maps and me, I am 21 now, but when I started at the extension school, I was 13. And so that meant that most days and nights I took the T back and forth, and I live beyond Riverside on the Green Line, so I took one of the longest routes you can take, Harvard to Riverside via Park Street. And yeah. So I got to know the system pretty well. I know where all the stations are, how long it takes to get from Park Street to Reservoir, and why the T slows to a crawl between Central and Harvard, something I'm sure a lot of you experienced on your way here. I can tell you later. So recently, the T ran a mapping competition this past year, and on the left there is the winning submission, and on the right was the new map that they ended up using that was redrawn based on the submission. And when I was away studying in France during the competition, but when I came home and saw the results, I kind of thought to myself, well, I could probably do a little bit better than that, primarily because the one that won was designed by a Russian graphic designer who's never been to Boston. And I sort of feel that knowing the lay of the land gives me a little bit of an advantage, especially the degree to which I know the T. So I decided to go ahead and make one. But in the process of making my map, I learned a lot about the complex issues involved in mapping, and I began to understand mapping, particularly transit mapping, a lot deeper as a two-dimensional representation of a four-dimensional urban circulation system. We draw in a flat image the way that we move through a city in 4 dimensions. So as I began to create this map, I also started to imagine what might a larger, more expansive system, an MBTA system that provides more coverage, look like. And so I started mapping that as well. And you can see that there. And so I'd like to talk about, so this is perhaps what the T might look like in 2024. I know, ambitious, but we might as well start talking about it. So I'd like to talk about these issues that I discovered while mapping, that I learned about, and use my maps as case studies for that. So the first issue is what I call GeoRealism, which is probably the most encompassing, particularly when you're talking about Boston and how we use our transit maps. And that will be kind of the main focus. And then the next issue will be the implications, which has to do with the give and take between the map and reality, and how they inform each other, and how our perceptions of the city inform how the city actually occurs. And then the final one is visioning, which has to do with using the map as a diagrammatic tool for understanding the city and for analyzing it. So GeoRealism. The above map is a georealistic map of the T. It was not made by myself, but it was made a few years ago. And it doesn't show buses or commuter rails or anything like that, but it shows all of the subway lines. And for a georealistic map, I will grant that it's quite pretty. It shows all of the lines and stations, it's true, and they are to scale and in their exact locations. So yes, I used to go from Harvard there and then all the way out to Riverside and then have to walk some. That is 11.7 miles Riverside to Park Street. But you know, in the process of being georealistic and showing everything to its full extent, 11.7 miles to Riverside, 11.7 to Braintree, and Forest Hills and Oak Grove are both 7.5. As a result, you can kind of tell that the center is fairly illegible. There's not much that you can see going on there. Excuse me. And you can also tell that kind of reduces the rider's comprehension of the system and the city. So the map does provide an insert there at the bottom left, but that's not, and it's somewhat helpful, but it doesn't really cover everything. And you can see that most of the green line labels are missing along the B and the C and the E. And if you can tell what's going on in this image, then we can probably find you a job in transit planning. So another map was produced by someone named Cameron Booth. He's a fairly famous transit mapper. And this was his version of the T-map from a few years ago. He did this one in 2012. But he said about this map, it shows the same information as the current official MBTA map with the addition of all stations on the Green Line branches and all stations on the Silver Line bus rapid transit. This does mean that the map is not the same square format as the current map, and I fully admit that to achieve that square format, you must omit stations on the Green Line. Unfortunately, two of the requirements of the mapping competition were one, that it was square, and two, that it had all of the Green Line labels. So his map doesn't really work out well. But I'd like to point out that it's a good attempt at beginning to balance georealism with diagrammaticism, and seeing you can kind of tell how far things are, and yet it's a little bit abstracted. So while thinking about that balance, I realized that georealism matters, in our case in Boston, a lot less than relational realism. So this is the difference between those two locations shown georealistically and relationally realistically. What that means, an example of that is that here at Savin Hill on the red line, you don't really need to know the exact split location between the Ashmont train and the Braintree train. You don't need to know that the Braintree train frustratingly passes Savin Hill without stopping. All you need to know is that it doesn't stop and that the split happens between Savin Hill and JFK. So one of the main relationships that we think about that we can approach in a relationally realistic way is the relationship of distance. And particularly with transit mapping, there are two ways to explain distance. You can say it takes this long to get there, or it is this far away. You don't need to show both. You can show time or distance. So to begin to kind of manage this, and because of some of the requirements that I had to deal with when I wanted to push and pull things around to make things fit, I introduced time as part of the map. And the way that I did that is, for example, here, you see Cleveland Circle and Reservoir stations are really quite close, but because of the way I wanted to show the distance to Riverside, I had to pull them apart a little bit. So you can see that it's only a 2-minute walk. It's a 5-minute walk to Chestnut Hill Avenue. It's 6 minutes between Brookline Village and back of the hill, I think. It's 5 minutes between Kenmore and Yawkey. It also helps to explain sort of unexpected intermodal connections that you might not really think about when you're trying to get around the city. So I introduced those walking lines basically as a substitute for proximity. So moving on to the next issue, implications. The implications have to do with the dialogue between the map and reality, as I said, and how they inform each other. It is also really important that they deal with map accuracy, or what I call mapuracy, which is about how we perceive the city through the map, and how the map begins to affect how we interact with the city. Most noticeably, mapuracy becomes most noticeable when there are flaws in the map. So at the top left there, you have the submission, and then at the bottom left, you have the redrawn map that the T decided to use. And you can see that the silver line is not shown as looping, which is what it actually does. So here, I've brought that in. And that's important because it shows something other than reality, which kind of causes a lapse in how we understand the city. The same is true when you don't show future expansions or potential future expansions, which have to do with, like the Green Line extension, that might affect land values. Just that if all of the riders knew that that's going to happen, it could seriously affect economic activity there. Or showing how far the D goes, which is actually the same amount of time as the B line, but twice as far. And lastly, visioning. And this was my map for what the system might look in 2024. And it includes, you can see, the much discussed urban ring as a red line extension that would connect all 4 green lines, the orange line, and a new silver line train. The silver line would run from Franklin Park to Everett, solve the north-south rail link, which is the problem of North Station and South Station not being connected, and provide a blue line extension that would connect to the red line all the way up through Eastie, Chelsea, Malden, and Everett. Excuse me. And in conclusion, I just wanted to sort of bring that home, this idea about that this ultimately boils down to creating a system for representing perception, that we're able to manage through managing the manipulation of lines on paper, we can very actively affect how we move through the city and guide our movements both now and in the future, because it permits us the ability to to create an image of the future that's quite recognizable that we can then advocate for as urban citizens and begin a discussion about what might our city look like in the future, what do we want it to look like, and how can we use something as simple as lines on paper, just a map, to give us something to look forward to. So that's about it. If you want more specifics about the maps, you can get them on my website. You can contact me on Twitter. You can also contact me through my website. And for now, I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Cyrus. As a rider of the Green Line myself from way out in the boonies from Newton Center, I appreciate the new map.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you like it.
So now for questions, please raise your hand and I'll come by.
You're going to tell us the secret of why the T slows down
Sure.
between Central
So
and
it's a bit of advocacy that happened by Harvard College freshmen. You know, the red line runs underneath Wigglesworth Hall on the south side of the yard, and it can get quite loud and rumbly if it's going at normal speed. So it has to slow down so that they can sleep, party, drink, eat, whatever. Study. That was the one I was forgetting, sorry.
Okay. Hi, thanks for the nice solutions you're offering. Have you ever seen the former governor, Michael Dukakis, on the Green Line?
I'd like run into him?
Yes.
No, I have not. That would be very exciting.
Yeah, because he was a big fan of the T and using it.
He's quite a transit advocate. You may know that that South Station is going to be renamed after him, which I think we'll still call it South Station, but you know.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, are the projections in the future, which are very interesting, are they based on official decisions or planning that you know of, or are they based on what you think might happen?
So there are two versions. One is that this map, which is my idea of what I would like to see happen. The blue line extension is something that's been discussed. The red line extension is the southern section of the long-discussed urban ring proposal, which has been under contemplation for over a century now. It's basically the route of the 66 bus, but if you've ever taken the 66 bus, it's a little bit it's really overcrowded. So I'd like to see these happen. The map of my map of the existing system, this one, only shows things that are definitely happening. So Green Line extension definitely happening. Silver Line to Chelsea definitely happening within a year or two.
So we have time for one more question.
More practical, what programming do you use for these maps? Are you just like, Illustrator, or do you have like a mapping set program?
So I have a bit of graphic design and architectural and urbanism training, so I use primarily Illustrator for these. I did do a little bit of it in CAD just to get some of the distances correct, because it's a little trickier in Illustrator. But yeah, pretty much Illustrator.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.